You are listening to the Novel Writing Podcast, episode 195. I'm your host, Colleen Mitchell. Grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. So today, if you happen to notice some purring in the microphone, it's because I have my little helper with me. Her name is Luna, and she is stuck on my lap as I record this episode. Today, we are diving into tropes. What they are, whether you need them, and how to use them, and even what to avoid. So let's start with what they are. Simply put, tropes are easily understood ideas that encompass an aspect of what happens in a story. You know tropes even if you've never heard the term before, and I guarantee you've used them in your writing even if it wasn't on purpose. Tropes are used both when crafting the stories themselves and when you're marketing your books. Here's a quick list of tropes that you've probably seen in TikToks or Reels, even if you didn't know that's what they're called. Found family, enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, orphan, and grumpy sunshine. And we'll talk more about other tropes later. Tropes exist to give you a place to start writing from, and for readers to know what to expect if you use it in your marketing. Not all authors use tropes in their marketing, but it can be a really good idea, especially if they are genre-specific tropes, or you're searching for readers who specifically read a trope that you write. For example, there are some romance readers who look for HEA in a book's description to know if they want to read it. HEA stands for Happily Ever After, and indicates the kind of ending they can expect if they pick up that book. Tropes are as much for readers as they are for writers, but as writers, we should know what the readers are expecting. So the big question then is, do you need tropes? I would argue yes, you do, but you don't have to follow a guide or check them off while you write, unless that's part of your outlining strategy. Some writing experts and some authors will say they hate tropes and don't use tropes, but if you read their work, you'll find that tropes abound. That's not because they're hypocrites, it's because we can't actually avoid tropes. Tropes are part of story. They're commonly used themes, character types, plot devices, or narrative patterns that readers recognize and then associate with particular meanings or expectations. What those writers really don't like, or what they try to avoid, is cookie-cutter formulaic tropes, which are most obvious in story structures like the hero's journey. The thing about tropes is that they can exist both as formulaic and with a fresh angle. But what we need to remember when purposefully using tropes is that we can never, ever, ever confuse the reader. So if you decide you hate using tropes, but then you write an enemies to lovers romance, don't try to market it as something different. Here are some trope examples split between 5 well-known genres, and I'm including books as well as movies in these examples at the end. We have, for romance, enemies to lovers. This is a rivalry or a dislike that turns into deep affection, and the primary example for this is Pride and Prejudice. The next one is friends to lovers. This is when a long-standing friendship blossoms into romance, and a couple examples here are 13 Going on 30 or Maid of Honor, both films. The next one is fake relationship. This is when your characters pretend to date, and that leads to real feelings. A good example of this is the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. We have second chance romance next. This is when past lovers reunite for another try, and a good one for this is The Notebook. Then there's slow burn, which is romantic tension building gradually before a payoff. Good examples of this are Outlander, and then the movie While You Were Sleeping. Then the last example as a romance trope is a love triangle. This is when romantic choices create emotional conflict, and the best example I could think of for this one is Twilight. The next genre is fantasy. So for here we have found family. This is when companions form deep chosen bonds stronger than blood. Good one for this is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. There's the chosen one trope, which is a single person destined to fulfill a world-changing role. Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. Then we have ancient prophecy. A foretold event drives the plot or motivates the characters. And then for this one, it's Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan. We got magical artifact, a powerful object everyone seeks or fears, Lord of the Rings. Reluctant hero, a protagonist forced into destiny despite initial resistance, The Hobbit. Royal intrigue, power struggles and court politics complicating the journey. Good one here is Game of Thrones. Rags to riches or secret heir. This is when a humble character learns they're secretly important. This one is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. And then the last one for fantasy is The Mentor, which is also one of the elements of the hero's journey. And this is when you have a guiding figure teaching the hero before or during the quest. A couple examples for this are Aragon by Christopher Paolini or Star Wars: A New Hope. The next genre is murder mystery. For these tropes, we've got locked room mystery. This is when a seemingly impossible crime challenges investigators. My favorite for this is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which I recently reread. We got red herring, which is false clues deliberately misleading readers. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Amateur sleuth, a non-professional unexpectedly solves the case, or I guess maybe on purpose solves the case. For this one, we've got The Number One Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith. Unreliable witness. Their testimony confuses more than it clarifies, and Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn is a great example of this one. The Final Reveal. This is when the culprit is unmasked in a climactic confrontation. A good one for this is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. And then the last trope for murder mystery is serial killer or unexpected culprit. This is when murders escalate and the killer isn't who anyone expects. And for this one, I have The Lovely Bones, and I forgot to grab the author for this one. The next genre is cozy mystery, and most of these are actually film examples because I haven't read widely in this genre. For the first one, we've got small town setting. This is when tight-knit communities amplify the drama and the gossip. And for this one, a good example is Broadchurch. And then there's a second one based off of Broadchurch, also with David Tennant. I just can't remember the name of that one. But Broadchurch and its spinoff. Hobby sleuth is when ordinary people investigate alongside their day jobs or passions. For this one, Pushing Daisies and Psych are great TV examples. Quirky sidekick. An eccentric helper provides humor and insight. Castle and BBC Sherlock. Eccentric suspects. This is colorful personalities creating tension and misdirection. For here we've got Clue, which is based on the board game, and Glass Onion, which is the sequel sort of to Knives Out. Then there's charming picturesque setting. This is where you have a comforting, idyllic backdrop, which is contrasting with the mystery. And the example for this is the TV show Murder, She Wrote. Victim is often a villain. This is where the dead are usually disliked, which softens dark themes. And this is another one where Murder on the Orient Express also comes out, but then Knives Out could be an example of this as well. And then the last trope for cozy mystery is cuddly pets or animal detectives, and I currently have a cuddly pet on my lap. This is where pets support sleuths or they charm readers. And for this one, we've got Turner and Hooch and the Cats and Dogs film. Now, the last genre I'm going to cover is science fiction, and the tropes for this starts with dystopian future. This is where oppressive regimes dominate bleak worlds, and a great example of this is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. We have rogue AI, artificial intelligence gains autonomy with dangerous results, which would be iRobot by Isaac Asimov. Another one for this would be 2001: A Space Odyssey. Just thought of that. First Contact. This is when humanity encounters alien life for the first time. Good one for this is The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Then we have the time travel paradox, which is altering the past complicates the future. This one is The Time Machine, also by H.G. Wells, and then the Back to the Future series. And then our last trope for science fiction is space voyages. This is where you have exploration, colonization, and discovery among the stars. And a good example of this is Dune by Frank Herbert. So you may recognize some of these and you may not. And not just the tropes, but also the examples. The point is that tropes are not just limited to things like enemies to lovers or happily ever after. They cover a wide range of literary elements that readers and writers can easily recognize. The way you describe your book in a pitch or a conversation with a friend will likely include tropes, whether you realize it or not. So how do we use tropes in writing? Authors can use tropes in their writing as building blocks of your story, your characters, and even themes. They provide easy entry points for your plotting. If you know what tropes you want to use, they can help with structuring the story in terms of plot points, pacing, character arcs, and more. Jennifer Hilt has great trope resources for writers in her Trope Thesaurus series. She explains how to choose tropes, how to combine tropes, how to subvert tropes, and how to use tropes so that your book is the best book it can possibly be. Jennifer's first Trope Thesaurus is also where I got the goals, motivations, and conflict advice that I've covered before, and she weaves tropes into these quite well. And you can find a link to Jennifer's Trope Thesaurus in the description. So how do you use tropes in marketing? Ultimately, tropes are shortcuts for readers to understand what you're selling. If you choose to use tropes in your marketing, you'll use them in taglines and hooks, ad copy, book descriptions, metadata like keywords, social media posts, newsletter subject lines, and elevator pitches. You'll choose your core tropes and use them across your marketing to draw the right kind of readers. You can also use tropes as the foundation for comparison titles without suggesting that your book is derivative of the comps. Another great tool is KDP Rocket, also known as Publisher Rocket, which is a research tool by Kindlepreneur that lets you research the popularity of different search terms and tropes in your genre, and that helps you choose keywords for your marketing. Just as important as knowing how to use tropes is how to not use them, aka what to avoid. So in writing, avoid breaking the promise of the trope. If you're writing slow burn romance, it can't resolve in chapter 3. Avoid using more than 5 tropes as primary drivers. If you have more than this, you're cluttering the story and it will be unfocused. Avoid ignoring why readers love tropes. You need to know the emotional payoff that readers expect from your chosen tropes and make sure you meet them. And you also need to avoid being inconsistent with the tropes that you chose. The tropes you choose need to be central to the story all the way through. You can't start with 3 to 5 core tropes at the beginning and then end with 3 to 5 different ones at the end. There needs to be a through line. And then in marketing, avoid misleading comparisons. Don't promise a trope or compare a book that doesn't actually compare to yours. Avoid using popular or buzzword tropes just because they're popular, even if they're not the right fit. For example, if you notice that a lot of people are reading enemies to lovers romance, but you're not writing enemies to lovers romance, don't use the word enemies to lovers romance in your marketing. Otherwise, the readers will feel like they've been cheated. Avoid listing every single trope in the book. You're going to have more than 5 if you choose 3 to 5 core ones. You are definitely going to have more than 5, but don't list every single one. You want to focus on just the core 3 to 5 that's going to draw the readers that you want to draw. And then avoid burying the lead in your copy. You need to use the strongest hook first. If the primary hook of your story is, let's go again, enemies to lovers romance, if the primary hook is that, don't list that one last. Lead with it. Again, Jennifer Hilt's books are great resources for studying, understanding, and using tropes both in your writing and your marketing. And again, you can find a link to her website in the description. So I hope this was helpful for understanding what tropes are and how to use them and what to avoid. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining me and my cute little co-host Luna. And remember, the first draft is supposed to be garbage. The Novel Writing Podcast is a production of Colleen Mitchell Writes. For more writing resources, including Curios, Tally Inc. author surfaces, and the 60-day novel writing challenge, check out the links in the description.